NASDAQ bubble was a pretty strong warning sign in the year 2000, and now with the housing bubble bursting in 07, 08, now we are living in another era where all they could offer us is more inflation of money, print more money, spend more money, run up more debt, borrow more money, regulate more, and it's supposed to solve the problems that were caused by those very things. And they're wondering, why are things not getting better? 3 years now spending trillions and trillions of dollars. Well, the trillions and trillions of dollars went into the hands of the people who caused the trouble. I mean, our government, and put the burden on the taxpayer of bailing out all the people who were ripping us off and benefiting from all these government programs. And the people who are getting stuck with the bad assets, the Fed as well as Treasury and the Congress bailed out the people and bought the bad assets, and instead of holding gold in the bank backing up our currencies, they hold mortgage assets, the derivatives, the worthless assets, and they call that wealth, and it isn't. And now they're starting to recognize it. People are saying, oh, maybe the economy is not yet recovered. Oh, everybody knows the economy hasn't really recovered. Will there be a double dip? Well, for the people who lost their jobs and still having trouble, it's not a double dip, it's this. Something has to be done, and it's not that complex. The economists who predicted it would come, if they would listen to those economists, we could solve the problems, because they were right about the bubble being built, and they know about what to do. And that means we'd have to change policies. But the reason it doesn't happen is a lot of people don't understand it, a lot of people don't believe it would work. And there is a political problem with what you're supposed to do, because you're supposed to do a lot less. You're not supposed to bail out people and say, oh, if we don't bail out the banks, it'll be the end of our country. Like right now, they're saying, if you don't raise the debt limit, it's the end of the Western civilization, as we know it. And so people get frightened, the politicians get frightened, just like when the bailouts came in 08. Both our candidates that were running for that election, both of them rushed back to D.C. and both voted for the TARP bailouts. So that's how well ingrained the system has been and was even 4 years ago. I think it's changed. I think since we've seen the Tea Party movement and the people speaking out and the progress we've made in emphasizing the Federal Reserve, and now that we are getting the Federal Reserve looked at, tremendous changes. And yet, if the government quits bailing out, people, there would be a tough time. If we'd have done it at the beginning, it would have been a bad year, and it would have been over, and we'd all be back to work again. So we have a lot to do. I think the most important thing is to realize how important the monetary system is and do something to curtail this power of the Federal Reserve System. I think that is one of the most important things that we do. When we try to solve all our problems, we have to look at economic problems. And first, what we need to do is try to replace the Federal Reserve. They print the money and they call that wealth. It isn't. We have to stop that, because all that does is dilute wealth. But where would the wealth come from? We need to repatriate a lot of the wealth that's been parked overseas. But businesses don't want to bring it home, because they're going to be taxed. They can start a business overseas with a lot less regulation, a lot less taxes, and they can do it quicker and more efficiently. So we'd have to change the tax code, not tax people when they bring their money at home, not tax people, not tax the corporations and punish them, because when you tax the corporations, it's just a sales tax, they have to pass it on. So the whole system would have to change to where we would believe and understand why free markets work. We've been not using free markets, and we've had this currency that causes a weak currency, and that causes capital to leave. And that's why people went, even to, of all places, our business people think it's better to go build a plant in China than it is in this country. So we have very serious problems. So the economic issue, it will be the very big issue. The other area that I've talked about a whole lot that is related to economics, but it also has to do with how we're wasting money overseas. I don't see how we can get control of our budget if we think we're going to cut health care. I think all our programs are overwhelmed. I think our government's doing way too much. I'd be willing to cut a little bit of everything and get things down. But I think it's more important to think about how much goes overseas. We're spending now over $1 trillion to maintain our empire. We're in 130 countries, 900 bases. We're building huge embassies around the world. And we're allowing our presidents to fight wars without even talking to the Congress. That is one thing that I have pledged. I would never go to war and have an all-out war without getting, permission from the Congress. It shouldn't be that way. The president has the authority to repel attacks, but not to go to war as being done today in Libya. We're at war in Libya, and the president says, we don't have to tell the Congress. It's not a real war because they're not shooting back.
Ridiculous.
I mean, that is literally the excuse that has been given. That if they're so weak, that we can take over a country, if they can't shoot back, it's not a real world war. But most people don't realize how many places we're in. Most people know we're still in Iraq, that we're in Afghanistan, that we're very much so with our CIA agents and our drones into Pakistan. We also know that Yemen is being attacked and bombed by our CIA and drones.
Syria.
And obviously everybody is aware of what's going on in Libya. But we're in Somalia as well and around the world. So this doesn't serve our interests. This distracts from our interests. This distracts from our national defense. And the burdens, it's so tragic about some of the burdens that we're going to have and the people coming back from Iraq. It's such a tragedy of what has happened, and so many diseases not yet even diagnosed. It took years before they figured out Persian Gulf War syndrome. It took decades to figure out, given the benefits to the veterans who suffer from Agent Orange consequences back in the Vietnam War. But this wouldn't be that difficult a problem. Since World War II, there's never been a declaration of war, and we fought in Korea. We still have troops there. We fought in Vietnam. We lost. We fought in all the areas that I've just mentioned, and never with a declaration of war. It's very simple. The Constitution is very clear. It should be declared. Under those conditions, we should all support it. We should also go, all participate, all fight and win the war. But 10 years in Afghanistan, after looking at the history of Afghanistan, how many more years are we going to be in Iraq? Iraq actually has been delivered to the Iranians because it has been turned over to the Shiites, and the Sunnis were in charge before, and the Shiites are allies with the Ayatollah in Iran. So even our efforts haven't paid off in that sense. We've driven them to another ally, which they're much more allied with China now. So we've created really a mess for ourselves. China's our banker. It's easier to start a business there. They're making a lot of money. Guess what they're doing? They're investing their money like old-fashioned capitalists, like we used to be. They're investing in the infrastructures and and looking at natural resources around the world. They go and invest money. They don't go and send troops and say that we need to be in charge here. Which dictator is going to be in charge? And that's what we're doing with all these revolutions going on in the Mediterranean. Many times they're attacking the very dictators that we put in place, and now we're involved very much picking the next dictator. So a lot could be done there. A more sensible foreign policy, and decides it would save a lot of money. In the other area, domestically, and what's going on, I think our personal liberties are being severely undermined. Whether it's economic liberty, the government's on our backs all the time over taxation and regulation. But even in the social sense, when you think about what's going on at our airports, it's so symbolic of what we've allowed our government to do. And I'm sure many of you have seen this. It was on the TV so often. It shows an older person who was being groped at the airport, and there was the agent doing, it looked like an ugly, mean, nasty picture on how he was, examining the groin area. And I thought, what are we putting up with? And there's never been, with all these